he manages the BRICS-led financial safety net. He has a clear vision of where the world economy is heading. He believes the beauty of development is to make life better for people all over the world. 2022 is the year of China in BRICS. In today's episode of Leaders Talk, we have the president of the New Development Bank.
Today, we'll take you inside a global multilateral financial institution. It's the very first international multilateral development institution initiated and led by major emerging economies of the world. It's recognized as a new paradigm of global financial governance. It also clearly describes itself as a crucial complement to the world's multilateral and regional financial institutions. It's called the BRICS New Development Bank, or NDB. So how did it come into being when the world economy was faltering, and how does it seek breakthroughs and stand out from its peers? What is its vision for development as the world witnesses transformations and grapples with a pandemic unseen in a century that cripples with global growth? 2022 is the year of China for BRICS, so we'll be asking a slew of questions to our guest today, Marcos Troyjo, president of NDB, who are now joining us in the show.
Mr. Troyjo has a rich career experience, and during his time as a former deputy economy minister of Brazil, he pushed for the agreement of the largest free trade deal between the economies of Mercosur and the European Union. He also founded the BRIC Lab at Columbia University and published a series of treatises on globalization and competitiveness. Since taking office as president of the NDB in May of 2020, he has met a lot of worldwide expectations.
President Troyjo, thank you so much for joining us here at China Media Group.
It is my pleasure to join your show. Thank you.
Well, 2022 is a very special year for the New Development Bank, or NDB, because it marks the 10th anniversary of the decision to establish the bank and the 7th anniversary of its official launch. And you once said that the bank is still like a 7-year-old child, but from what we see, this child has already delivered some really outstanding achievements. For instance, it has expanded from the initial 5 member states to 9 ones now, approved more than 80 projects of nearly $32 billion. So for you, as the president of the bank, what has been the bank's biggest achievements?
Well, it's true. It's really remarkable to think that only about a decade ago, the New Development Bank only existed as a dream. Emerging economies for a long time have tried to have a bigger voice in multilateral affairs in the traditional institutions established in the 1940s. So it was a long-standing dream to have a new development institution that could point towards the future. And then the BRICS came together and established the NDB, which I think is another very important symbol of what emerging economies can achieve when they work together. And we've been quite successful so far, thanks to, once again, the support of our leaders, the support of our member countries, and we are living up to the very name of the institution.
The financial crisis in 2008 was the worst since the World War II, battering the global economy with a full-blown recession. Countries began to explore the possibility of building a common financial safety net. In March of 2012, the 4th summit of the BRICS leaders was held in New Delhi, India, where leaders discussed in depth the possibility of establishing a new financial institution. 2 years later, at the 6th BRICS Summit, leaders of China, Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa signed the agreement on the New Development Bank. This was truly a historic move. Of all the multilateral developing banks founded since the World War II, none was led by a developing country. Since the day of its founding, the concept of equality has been inscribed. Behind it is BRICS countries' collective wish to build a new international financial order.
The name of the bank, New Development Bank, it has a word new in it. And, this concept of new has also been carried out throughout the design, the management, also the governance of the bank. Well, here, first of all, I want to invite you to watch a video together with us. It's a promo video that is posted on the official website of the bank about what makes it so different. In this video, we did the math that the word new was mentioned about 15 times. Well, Mr. Troyjo, I know you used to have great passion for studying the origin of words. So help us understand here that why the word new is particularly important to the bank, and how can you make sure that this is not only just talk the talk, but also walking the talk?
Yeah, I think our challenge, is to make the New Development Bank new every day, and I think in different dimensions. New in terms of our relationship with our member countries. We have moved away from the traditional prescriptions of those institutions that were established long ago. Of course, we are part of a multilateral community where we are musicians in an orchestra that tries to play the beautiful song of the promotion
That's really good metaphor.
of development. We are new in the sense that we are perhaps the first institution that is fully governed by emerging economies. We are new also because there is a kind of metamorphosis, Yuan, in the sense of infrastructure. Since our mandate is infrastructure, we're not only talking about the physical, the tangible aspects of infrastructure. So, for example, if you're thinking about the infrastructure in education, it's not only about the school building, but having that building connected to allow for classes that are taught remotely. And also new in terms of building new governance. If we can put together the biggest, the most important emerging economies of the world so as to define what new development will mean for the future, I think this is a very key contribution to promoting global prosperity and, of course, further cooperation in a global juncture where this is so badly needed.
NDB follows a simple yet efficient structure, which makes its service fast and precise. In April of 2020, the New Development Bank set up a mechanism for COVID-19 emergency program loans, fast-tracking lendings worth of $9 billion. The timely help has assisted member countries in their fight against the pandemic and economic recovery. In June of 2021, NDB approved and released an economic recovery loan to South Africa. In just 6 months' time, it helped create some 700,000 jobs under the country's presidential employment stimulus.
How can the NDB respond, first of all, so efficiently, and also at the same time to act in such a very targeted manner?
Well, when our founders decided to set up the bank, one of the key characteristics that they wanted the NDB to feature was the issue of agility, to be able to respond in a very fast and efficient manner to challenges that would be arising. And the challenges have been really tremendous. I mean, think about the emergence of COVID-19 and, of course, the economic problems that come along with it. We run a very tight crew here. We are able, through efficiency and interacting very closely with our member countries, to respond with great agility. And I think our COVID response projects are a very good example of that.
Well, there's another reason that why the year 2022 is very special, because now the bank is transitioning from its first 5-year general strategy to the second one. In this new plan, about 40% of the investment will be made on climate change related projects. So why the bank decides to make its biggest investment on such front? And also, what are some of the other highlights of this new plan?
Yeah, I mean, the first cycle of 5 years was, of course, very focused on getting the institution off the ground, moving it from a startup phase to being a full-fledged multilateral development institution. Now, over this next 5 years and the strategy that covers it, Yuan, there is a great stress, there is a great emphasis on development quality, on development impact. So yes, there are focus areas, as you have indicated. For example, climate change is one of the biggest challenges for our planet, and I'll make sure that NDB advances its contributions to addressing it. And of course, we also, as I mentioned to you earlier on, a part of a multilateral family. So we want to have bigger and bigger associations with other development institutions so as to crowd in the resources that are there to establish the bridge between the needs and the potential of our member countries.
At the same time, we are wondering, Mr. Troyjo, that do you personally have any projects that you felt that really impressive or very concerned?
Yeah, I think the beautiful thing about development, Yuan, is that you change people's lives for the better. Mm-hmm. For example, Brazil has received investments from the New Development Bank so as to allow for the bigger solar energy plant in Latin America. India has received investments from the New Development Bank to allow for faster connections on railways so that a couple who is coming back home from work can spend more time with their children. In China, you have major utilization of the power of wind to make cleaner energy. And one of the beauties about it is that these examples stand out and they can be used for other developing nations as well. So sometimes a solution that works in China or in India or in Brazil can actually inspire other development projects across the development world. And I think, you see, this is going to be more and more the case because one of the chief characteristics of the global scenario that we have out there, Yuan, is that the big emerging economies, I always like to make this comparison between the traditional G7, whereas if you take into account the so-called E7, the E7 by purchasing power parity comparison is already bigger than the G7. So the projects that you approve in terms of development here, they have a bigger impact because you're also talking about big territories, big populations.
Well, President Troyjo, since you mentioned the comparison between the E7, which are the most important emerging markets, and also the fastest growing emerging markets. So how do you see the role of these countries, especially the BRICS, in the future economic landscape?
Well, I think the geoeconomic meridian of the world, the geoeconomic Greenwich of the world is indeed shifting towards big emerging economies. If you gauge the actual contribution that these countries have towards the formation of global demand and global growth, it is indeed robust. I think the most important contributions to global expansion, economically speaking, will continue to be from emerging markets. And look at a tough year like 2022, where there is a lot of talk about recession, likely recession in Europe and in the United States. The emerging markets, the big emerging economies will still see growth that can be considered as robust. And I think this signals very clearly towards the future of where the, once again, geoeconomic meridian will be going by. And I think this also shows how the New Development Bank, an institution that is positioning itself to become the premier development bank for the emerging economies, is really in the right niche.
I see a country on the move.
There's my opportunity.
Is it good to change so fast?
Yes, but it's a challenge.
We have one foot in the future.
But we never forget our past.
We need to talk to one another.
And listen.
More than 1 billion voices telling their stories. Rediscovering China, only on CGTN. Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
BRICS countries stand out as the epitome of emerging economies. Statistics show that in the past 2 decades, the emerging markets and developing countries have increased their share of the world GDP from 24% to over 40%. The BRICS now account for 23% of the global economy, 42% of the world's population, contributing 18% of trade and 50% of growth globally. In 2021, BRICS economies grew by 7.6%, much higher than the world average of 5.5%. The BRICS are now one of the most important driving forces behind world economic growth. China resumed the chair of BRICS in 2022. In June, the 14th BRICS Summit was held under the theme of Foster High-Quality BRICS Partnership, usher in a new era for global development. Throughout this year, more than 170 events will be held. What's more, the BRICS Plus framework has attracted more than 50 non-BRICS countries, a true testimony of the magnetic appeal of this cooperation mechanism.
How do you see the role of China in promoting and enhancing BRICS cooperation?
It's a very important one. I mean, when the concept of BRICS first came about in the early 2000s, China was only about 1/8 the economic size that it features today. China has become the world's number 2 economy in terms of nominal GDP. Many of the BRICS countries have in China its most important trading partner. Look at my case, Brazil. I mean, 20 years ago, bilateral trade between Brazil and China was $1 billion a year. Now it is $1 billion every 60 hours. So the exchanges have been truly amazing. And the BRICS grouping covers much more than the economy and trade. I mean, the numbers of meetings that you have involving ministers of the environment, ministers of, for example, health, science and technology shows that the dialogue involving these big emerging economies can be really transformative. Thanks to the BRICS dynamics, these leaders who are very important for the future of the world, for the future of mankind, they meet 3 or 4 times a year. And I think this proximity, this capacity to promote dialogue on a regular basis is a key contribution to global cooperation. So the role of China in BRICS is a very central one.
During the 14th BRICS Summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping quoted a Chinese phrase in his speech, which goes, "True gold can stand the test of fire." How do you interpret such a Chinese phrase, and also how do you evaluate the BRICS cooperation mechanism since its inception?
Well, the BRICS countries, if you look at from a certain perspective, they are very different. They have different civilizational backgrounds. They have cultural experiences. They sometimes even adopt different political systems. There are economies of different scales. But where the commonalities exist, for example, having a bigger and bigger voice and participation in global governance, boosting investment in infrastructure, joining forces to promote sustainable development, bridge the gap, bridge the deficit of global cooperation, is truly a great contribution, because we are here talking about a grouping that represents more than 40% of the world's population. It will only grow in size, it will only grow in relevance. So once again, this partnership will stand the test of time.
Just as President Xi once put it, BRICS is neither a private club nor an exclusive circle. In 2021, the New Development Bank also completed its first expansion, adding 4 new members, including Bangladesh, the United Arab Emirates, Uruguay, and Egypt. Countries such as Iran, Argentina, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey have also expressed their willingness to join the BRICS. The BRICS mechanism has been a crucial platform for developing countries to explore their own development paths and reform the current global order. Over the past decade, BRICS has weathered through many crises, from great power politics to economic uncertainties and the COVID-19 pandemic. This mechanism proved to be the common vision of many developing countries to seek development opportunities and reshape the world order.
But there are some doubts and criticisms saying, the BRICS are collapsing, they are fading. How would you respond to voices like this?
The entire set of, groupings and institutions are out there that are present in international relations are object of criticism. But let's look at BRICS. So BRICS started out as a concept for how the future of the global economy would look like, but now it has evolved to really a tool that promotes global governance. It has been also a grouping that come up with institution of its own, like the New Development Bank. So yes, there's probably a lot of room for improvement, and there always is, but I think the achievements of the group have indeed been remarkable, and we should not be let down by criticism. We should build on the commonalities, we should build on the common interests, and I'm sure this is going to be the case for the BRICS grouping.
The future could be, the outlook could be bright, but now the world is still faced with so many challenges. And many say that now we're not only suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the pandemic of deglobalization. So, President Troyjo, in your opinion, how can the BRICS countries enhance stability and prosperity of regional economy through multilateral cooperation?
World is still living the negative effects of COVID. 2020 was seen as the year of the Great Intermission. Some people like to compare it to 1929, and with the dire prospects of a lost decade with global depression. And as we know, there's an increase in inflation in many countries across the globe. But I think none of these are the biggest story out there. The biggest story is indeed the fact that big emerging economies are taking a bigger and bigger slice of the global GDP pie. Their trade relations, their investment flows, I think, are a very good example of how that world is changing.
Well, President Troyjo, you once served multiple roles at the Brazilian government, and in 2019, as the main negotiator, you facilitated the signing of a large-scale trade agreement between the Southern Common Market and the European Union. And we all know this negotiation was really a tough journey, which lasted for about 20 years and came to a conclusion finally after overcoming so many difficulties and setbacks. So now you work as the head of a multilateral financial institutions. How do you think that member countries with different economic conditions, cultural backgrounds, and social development, as you mentioned before, can better seek common ground and mutual benefits?
I think, Yuan, that the lessons of history are clear. If you look at every single economic miracle after World War II, so Germany, Japan, China since 1978, they all have, in spite of their civilizational and cultural differences, one characteristic in common. These countries have boosted their economic performance through global trade, through global investment. So, insofar as institutions like the New Development Bank are a key actor in that regard, so far as multilateralism is seen as the most important method for not only solving problems, but also for promoting global cooperation, I think we're going to be traveling along the right track.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the the difference.
The New Development Bank opened a new chapter on September the 20th, 2021. Its headquarters in the Expo Park area of the Shanghai's Pudong New Area were officially handed over. And as the first international and multilateral financing institution headquartered in Shanghai, President Marcos Troyjo said that they now finally have a home of their own to settle in. In the future, the institution will further take root in China and be a witness of China's reform and opening up on an increasingly larger scale.
Well, President Troyjo, now you're working and living in China for a couple of years, especially after you move into that state-of-the-art building. How's your life here in China? And we Chinese people, we like to talk about a phrase called the Chinese dream. Do you have a dream that's relevant with China?
Well, it's really a pleasure to work and live in Shanghai. It's one of the most dynamic cities of the world. And the headquarters of NDB being in Shanghai really constitute a symbol not only for the city, and this is something that I always like to say. Right. When you think of Geneva, for example, you think of the Palace of the Nations. When you think of New York, you think about the United Nations building on First Avenue. So more and more in the future, when we think of Shanghai, we want people to think of the New Development Bank and how that created, the seeds and the necessary conditions for emerging economies to be even more prosperous.
Well, President Troyjo, it was such a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for sharing with us your very insightful views.
I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much for your work, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in Beijing in person.
Okay, look forward to that. Again, thank you. Gracias. The mighty river of history is featured by both tranquil waters and roaring waves, but it always keeps on rushing forward. The story of New Development Bank today shows us that the great ship of the BRICS is braving wind and waves and forging ahead with great courage. And China will, as always, work with other countries, including the BRICS, to explore a path of global governance that enables the mutual support and win-win cooperation. And that'll do for this edition of Leaders Talk here on CGTN. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more news updates coming up next.